The oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest kind of fear is the fear of the unknown. It's a quote from Lovecraft, and it kind of encapsulates what the people in the Wasteland go through on a day-to-day basis. Regular people don't know what is really going on out there, how these creatures and mutants came to be, or what the next device will be that destroys the world. Being afraid in Fallout's world would be second nature. Everything and anything wants to kill you. So what are some of the things they're scared of the most? Or things they thought they'd never have to worry about until it was already too late? If you guys enjoy Fallout, then you've come to the right place. We have a ton of content on the channel and a lot more to come, so consider subbing. Thanks for watching. Really, just wanted to go on a brief tangent for those of you who don't skip this part and are subs. I just wanted to say thank you, truly. We never thought this channel would become what it is, and I'm incredibly thankful. I think some of these last vids we've got a little philosophical, but we have some really interesting ideas coming up, so I hope you stick around. Thanks again, and enjoy the vid. The only thing to fear is fear itself. This is a big issue for a lot of Wastelanders, and I thought it was the best place to start for this video. You would probably think of things like slavers or super mutants, which definitely terrify people in the Wasteland. But when it comes down to it, I think there's a lot more fear out there than we realize. Not just the physical threats that are obvious, but also the ones that people make up in their own minds. If super mutants exist, then what else is out there? Giant angry lizards are very scary, but is it possible that there could be something worse? This is what I imagine people in the wastes are thinking. They lay their heads down and wonder about the boogeyman of the waste, and not the random monsters that they encounter on a daily basis. That's not to say that they don't fear those monsters as well. In fact, we have a few of them on the list. But that paranoia is what's got me interested. How far down the rabbit hole some of these people have fallen, and where fear has its grip on them, when really, they're fine. Paranoia can get people killed. Let's start with the obvious. A whole region that's been overrun with fear. The Commonwealth. And for good reason, honestly. For years, they've been experiencing their own type of boogeyman. Day after day, these people are worried that their loved ones are going to be taken in the night, and that they're going to be replaced by something they don't even recognize. It might walk and talk like your favorite person, but the reality is that this isn't the person you know and love. It's hard to tell because they're basically indistinguishable, but something inside you feels off. You can't prove that this isn't your loved one, it's just a gut feeling. The paranoia starts to creep in. They even start to look just a little bit different in your mind. Uncanny valley begins to crawl into your thoughts, and then hatred you start to feel towards this thing. They stole away the person you loved, and now all that's left is a puppet. A poorly made doppelganger masquerading around in the skin of someone that you loved dearly. Of course you reach for your weapon, and of course you decide to get the truth and take care of this fake abomination. But when they're dead and you feel vindicated, you realize that it was them all along. They hadn't been stolen away in the night. You had just lost yourself to the constant paranoia of it all. And that's how it works here in the Commonwealth. Though sometimes people are right and their friends or family have been replaced by synths. If you travel through Diamond City for a while, that's when you start to see just how rooted in this particular fear is. Myrna might be the best example. She's literally nicknamed Crazy Myrna. Let's just have a brief conversation with her, so you can get a good idea of how this paranoia worms its way inside of people.
Synths. No synths allowed here. You? I don't know you. Just keep your distance.
Why?
Because I don't know you, and I will not serve a synth pretending to be human. So are you human?
Synth? What's a synth?
A synth, as in synthetic person. Those things the Institute makes. Look real, with hair and sweat and blood and everything. So, are you human or not?
Human as the day I was born.
Well, you do look human enough, but I'll be watching you. I have eyes like well, they're good eyes. Got it? All right. We can do business, but no funny stuff.
Honestly, more than anything, it's just sad. Her entire business is centered around travelers coming in and buying or selling their wares to her, and she's so afraid of this existential threat that it's affecting her day-to-day life. How many customers are going to be turned off by her crazy ramblings and being accused of being a synth? Though, I bet a lot of people in the Commonwealth probably share her mentality. Maybe she's even spreading the paranoia to other people. And that's just one person in Diamond City. Don't get me wrong, the Institute is a threat, and they're absolutely replacing people. But to what extent, these people really have no idea. And this is exactly the type of control the Institute would want. They want people out here fearing for their lives. They want that paranoia to spread so that it's easier to control the population. It goes even further with places like Covenant, a whole settlement that has created a safe test to figure out if somebody is a synth or not.
We don't just let anyone inside. There's an entrance test. We call it the safe test. Everyone's got to take it.
Interesting idea. Between you and me, what's the test for?
I probably shouldn't say nothing, but listen. We want to make sure only good people come into Covenant. No undesirables. Nobody that ain't actually what they seem, you know?
I'm new to the area. What do you mean about undesirables?
But you don't know about... Jesus, listen. Not everyone in the Commonwealth is human, okay? Some are... synths. I'm not going to say anything more than that. Just take the test. You pass, and you can come inside where everything's safe, all right?
And if they have any suspicion, which could really be anything, like maybe a funny looking mole on your face, well then they'll kidnap you and perform horrible tests on you. These people have let fear run rampant, and the whole town is in on the idea. I won't get into it because we all know about Covenant at this point, but really it's a good way to show just how scared people can get, and how it can cause massive ripples across certain communities in the Waste. Their fear is causing innocent people to lose their lives, and they won't be the only settlement that we talk about for this exact same reason. The Institute has used paranoia as a weapon in the Commonwealth region, and it's evident in almost every location that you can go to, and it's a potent weapon. It's absolutely working. But it's not just the Commonwealth that has this issue. There are lots of groups and people in the Waste facing down their own share of unhealthy amount of fear. The Mojave chapter of the Brotherhood of Steel comes to mind. They have good reasons for their trauma. I mean, they were almost completely wiped out by the NCR. But unlucky for them, it wasn't just a military loss. This ended up becoming psychological devastation for them, to put it lightly. Instead of them regrouping in the open and strapping up their metallic boots, they chose to hide underground in a bunker. Maybe this saved their lives for the time being, sure. But just talk to the people down there and you'll see why this might have been their downfall.
He refuses to see that our isolation is slowly weakening us. Aside from being our duty, going out on missions is what kept us strong. And because he fails to see that, he must be replaced.
These people have let their loss and their fear consume them in every waking breath. They're scared of how dangerous the outside world has become, according to them. They don't recruit any outside help, and when they do, it becomes a massive argument within their ranks. They're just an isolated community that refuses to re-engage with the world because of their own fears that they have fostered. Like I said, it's not like their fears aren't validated to a certain degree. They did almost lose everything. But now it's been years, and they still refuse to push out and do more. They're slowly losing themselves to it, disappearing in the background. They're hoarding technology like a good Brotherhood chapter would, but they also refuse to actually use it. The paranoia for them might have actually saved their lives in the beginning, finding a way to hide before the NCR could wipe them out fully. But now they're just stagnating underground, slowly weakening themselves because of their isolation. Then you kind of have the opposite of that in the capital Wasteland with Tenpenny Tower. I don't know if calling their disdain of ghouls is a fear, but to me it definitely still feels like paranoia.
You're out of line. Those filthy bitches can stay living in those metro tunnels. They'll move in here over my dead body.
And let's not get it twisted. This paranoia or fear of ghouls is rampant across all the Wastelands. Everywhere you go, you'll find communities that refuse to let ghouls exist within them. Maybe because they're disgusted by the way they look, or maybe it's because they're afraid that they might turn feral at any moment. There's lots of reasons. Tenpenny Towers is more about their status, I guess you could say. They see the ghouls kind of like a riffraff. They're unwanted, and if they're to be let in, then they would cause whole hosts of problems for the fine and fancy people. Some of the people say it's because the ghouls can't be trusted, and that they've seen mutants destroy entire towns. So basically, they connect the ghouls with inevitable death and carnage. Their irrational fear of ghouls is unfounded by all of their standards. Most of the ghouls we run into in the Waste that still have their minds are pretty normal by all accounts. You might have seen it this way too when you first played Fallout 3. I know I did. So you convince the people to stop being afraid of the non-existent threat, and then the funniest thing happens. The ghouls end up killing everyone and taking over the place. I don't know what Todd was trying to say about this whole thing, but it's actually one of the quests where making a choice you might think is the right one actually ends in consequences you probably couldn't foresee, which is the kind of choice and consequences I want to see in the future games. Sorry, bit of a tangent there. But as far as fear and paranoia goes, This basically confirmed all of that for these people in their last moments. Sometimes fear can keep you alive to an extent, and maybe the ghouls had their own fears about the higher class individuals in this hotel. Maybe they were afraid they would be kicked out again, or something worse. And as we know from the beginning of this whole section, when the fear takes over, you make irrational decisions. The ghouls decided that it might be safer to dispose of the smoothskins first, before they could do it back to them. But what they should be afraid of now is the lone wanderer. Let's not forget about the individual people you'll find throughout the Waste that have been completely changed by their own personal fears and paranoia. And I know when I say that, you think of the man himself, Nobark Noonan. It's people like him that have lost their minds to unwarranted fears around them. Usually it doesn't hurt anyone. You run into Nobark and hear all of his wacko theories and stuff, and you just think he's a crazy guy, which he pretty much is. But sometimes you'll run into people that have a bit of power alongside their paranoia, and that creates a really bad mixture. You could consider House as one of those people. He was always 10 steps ahead of everyone else, but he was that way because of his paranoia. Or I think of people like Tabitha on Black Mountain. She's a little different because she has schizophrenia, but she's still paranoid to all hell. And because of that, she's taken over the mountain and created another super mutant militia threatening the Wasteland. Okay, maybe I'm dragging this whole thing along a little too much, and you get the point by now. Really, I just wanted to show you maybe the less thought about thing when it comes to Fallout. Yes, real danger exists and it's scary, but information about the world or creatures is always incomplete for the people living in the Waste. You and I can see it from a third-person perspective, like we are information gods of this world. We know where super mutants and Deathclaws come from. We know how they work and interact with the world. But most people living in the Wastelands have no idea. They would just see a giant lizard and run. They don't know why the Institute exists and what exactly they're doing with their family members being replaced. Or the Mojave chapter. We know how it could end for them in multiple ways. But put yourself in their shoes and you'd have no idea what the right choice is. Re-emerge and you might just make it out of there. Or it will be the cause of getting everyone you love killed. Uncertainty is paranoia. This is the true fear of the Wasteland at its heart, and not just some madness that overcomes these people. It's a real thing. They should be afraid. There's lots to be afraid of, as you'll see in the rest of this video. It just has me wondering, if these people had better ways of communication and information, how would that fear change? But then again, does it really ever?
If you ask a Wastelander what they fear, a lot of city folk might say raiders. But if you're a wanderer, then you know what to really fear. They'd start with the thing that makes raiders walk the other direction. Deathclaws are basically the closest Fallout has to a nightmare that can sprint. The part that makes them extra nasty is they weren't born the way most wasteland creatures were. Deathclaws started as a government project. Pre-war America wanted a replacement for human troops for high-risk search and destroy jobs. And the answer was to build a monster that can survive anywhere, track targets, and win almost every close-range fight. The base animal was Jackson's chameleon. Then they mixed in other DNA until they got this bipedal tank with hands and razor-sharp claws, and enough muscle to treat a grown man like a paper bag by ripping through their body in a single swipe. There's even lore that at least one got used in Alaska during the war, basically as a living weapon dropped into combat. Then the Great War happened and we see containment failing. And now you've got a creature that was designed to thrive without help, running around in a world with no fences and governmental funding that has long expired. Even worse, there's no one around to clean up the mistake. So the Deathclaw population spreads, and by the late 2200s, Deathclaws aren't just a rumor anymore. Early on, people treated them like a tall tale. Like, imagine hearing about it, some kind of demon lizard in the desert walking around. You'd probably try to tell them to lay off the chems. But once nests start showing up and entire areas get locked down, that skepticism dies fast. And that's the key point. Deathclaws don't just wander through like a random threat. They're smart enough and have the natural instincts to claim territory. They're pack animals with an alpha male and an alpha female calling the shots, and once a pack settles in, it's not like shooting out a few mole rats. A Deathclaw pack is a long-term problem. They'll use caves, warehouses, abandoned buildings, quarries, any place that gives them cover and room to nest. Quarry Junction in the Mojave is the perfect example of how this works. Humans show up with industry, think they can develop an area, and then the Deathclaws move in and turn it into a dead zone. After that, the map can say whatever it wants. Everyone local knows the truth though. You're not passing through, more you're gambling with your life. And their bodies are built to make humans feel helpless. They've got thick hide that shrugs off a lot of smaller weapons, and those hands are the things that nightmares are made of, because they have 5 fingers with sharp talons, opposable thumbs, eyes that glow like a demon in the night. So it's not just strength they warrant, but it's also this control and this fear. They can grab you and lift you high up in the air, and yes, if you faced one, you'll know this feeling all too well. They tear you up and then they keep moving. And even if you're armed, you don't get much time to react because they can charge on all fours when they want speed. So I would say that the fear is practical. People know the fight ends fast if they're caught wrong. But the real reason Deathclaws stay scary is reproduction in nests. Deathclaws lay eggs in clusters and the pack protects them hard. That means if you find a nest, you didn't discover the loot. You probably discovered an army. And if you kill young ones or mess with the eggs, you're basically signing up for the mother going berserk. Us Wastelanders learn quickly that Deathclaws don't need a reason to kill you because they're basically wild animals. They just need you inside their space at the wrong time. Now, add the human factor. People keep trying to turn Deathclaws back into weapons. Scientists and military-minded groups look at them and see free power. The Enclave is the biggest example of this. On the West Coast, they tried modifying Deathclaws with FEV to boost intelligence, thinking they'd get obedient living tanks. And surprisingly, it kind of worked, just not the way they wanted. They ended up creating intelligent Deathclaws with actual self-awareness, enough to talk and reason and even mimic human speech. The wild part is those intelligent Deathclaws tried to carve out a peaceful home for themselves. That's one of the coolest and maybe saddest parts in Fallout lore. You can have the most terrifying predator in the Wasteland, and one version of it basically proves it can become a person with a culture and values. But of course, the Enclave can't allow that. Frank Horrigan gets sent in and that whole intelligent pack gets wiped out, with only a couple surviving because they weren't there. Now, I personally think intelligent Deathclaws could have killed the iconic Frank Horrigan because there was a pack of them that could solve complex problems, so Frank shouldn't have stood a chance, but that's a discussion for another day. Anyway, after that, the Enclave learns the lesson a lot of factions learned in Fallout. You can't always improve the Wasteland, but you can try to control it. Just that usually doesn't go well either. So later, instead of hoping intelligence equals obedience, they go for blunt control methods like domestication units, surgically messing with the creature's brain so it follows orders. This is kind of scary for a different reason because now you're not just dealing with a normal Deathclaw, you're dealing with a Deathclaw that's being aimed at you by people in power armor. So when you ask why do people fear Deathclaws, it's not just because it's this big monster with big claws. It's everything around them. They're a pre-war mistake that multiplied, and they turned whole regions into no-go zones. They operate like a real apex predator with territory and packs and nests and all with a little dose of intelligence. And every time humanity tries to use them as a tool again, it usually makes things worse. Deathclaws are the Wasteland's history showing that the old world didn't just end with nukes, it left behind projects that were built to kill efficiently, and they're still doing exactly what they were made to do. Now, if you ask someone in Appalachia what they fear most, you'll get a different answer depending on when they showed up. Settlers who just rolled in might say raiders, or the insane weather, or the fact that half the land glows at night now because of what lurks in the shadows. But if you're someone who was around before Vault 76 cracked open, or you've listened to enough holotapes to understand what actually happened here, you don't start with any of that. You start with the thing that ended the argument for every faction in the region. The Scorch Plague wasn't just another Wasteland problem, it was an extinction level problem that warrior neighbors face and answered to something screaming in the sky. The Scorch Plague is one of the few threats in Fallout that not only killed people, because let's face it, everything is pretty much designed to kill humanity at this point, but it converted them. It turned Appalachia into a place where the safest assumption was that anything breathing was either already infected or about to be. And what makes it even worse is that it wasn't nature doing its thing. This was man-made Fallout in the most literal sense. Government bunkers and biochemical experiments, power-hungry leaders, and then a mistake that got released into the wild like a rabid dog. Except this dog could fly and have sex and breed and infect an entire country without landing. The weird part is it all starts with something you'd never take seriously on paper, which is a simple bat. Well, after COVID, I guess people could take a bat seriously. The Scorch beasts were originally just local bats down in the Cranberry Bog region that got pulled into Appalachian Enclave experiments around 2083. Deep underground in old mining tunnels and caverns where nobody above would ever see what was happening, Enclave scientists were messing with biochemical agents. Early on, the results were considered a failure. They noticed odd behavior, like these mutated bats attracting other animals, but it wasn't exactly the weapon they wanted. It looked like another dead-end project. And then Fallout does what Fallout always does. Somebody adds radiation into the mix, and suddenly the failed experiment becomes the worst thing to ever happen to Appalachia. Once those bats were exposed to both the biochemical agents and radiation, something finally clicked scientifically speaking. Not only did the bats get bigger, and I'm talking a lot bigger, they became carriers for something catastrophic. They started producing this particulate that falls from their wings like a dust or spores, like the air itself is contaminated when they pass over. It's one of those details that would make your stomach drop because it means you don't even need to be bitten by these things. You just need to be under it at the wrong time. And now you're in the pipeline of death or converting into something else. That's the first reason people fear the Scorch Plague more than most threats. You can avoid a Deathclaw by avoiding its territory and using a different route on an adventure. You can avoid raiders by keeping your head down and not traveling alone. You can even avoid super mutants by learning where they patrol. But how do you avoid something that can infect you from the sky on a whim? How do you build a wall against something that flies over the wall and turns the people behind it into soldiers that resemble zombies? And this is where the real villain part comes in. Cue Thomas Eckhart. This is one of those Fallout stories where a single man's ego turns a disaster into a catastrophe. Thomas is basically a pre-war politician who ends up playing president inside the bunker systems, and he wants nuclear access. He really wants DEFCON status, which is really just authority. And instead of seeing the Scorch Beast as a problem to be erased, he sees them as a tool to justify escalation. So rather than locking it down and destroying it, he pushes for their study. He keeps people in the dark and siloed, and then around 2085 to 2086, he unleashes them into Appalachia. So the Scorch Beasts get out and they start doing what they're built to do. They nest and mate like rabbits, and then they spread and they hunt. The scary part is that they create more of the problem by spreading the plague. That plague infects nearly everything from humans and animals to mutants. It spreads by direct contact and by droplets, and it hits the body in a way that looks like you're burning alive from the inside. Like, I don't know, you're scorched. Skin begins to darken and it smells like ash. Then lesions appear, like your body is literally cooking. Then the skin splits open and you see raw flesh and these green ultracite crystals forcing their way out of you like the disease is turning you into a mineral deposit. And once the crystals show up, that's it. You're fucking cooked. That's when you move from being infected and start being scorched. Now, let's talk about the Scorch themselves, because this is where Fallout 76 becomes genuinely crazy in a way that doesn't always get enough credit because of the fact that it's 76. Scorched aren't zombies, although I will say that's basically what they are. A lot of them were normal people like responders, free states, raiders, miners, soldiers, families. And the messed up part is after they turn, they can still function. Scorched humans can use weapons like the Flood do in Halo.
Sergeant, we're surrounded. God damn it, Jenkins! Fire your weapon!
They can pick up rifles and shoot you, and their cerebral cortex still functions, which means they can reload and keep shooting. We actually see some of them hold melee weapons too. They can wear the same uniforms they wore before, just now they're tattered and fused into this burnt crystallized body. So when you fight them, you're fighting the remains of the region's last attempt at civilization. It's like Appalachia is haunted, except instead of ghosts, it's armed victims who never got to die properly. And mentally, the plague makes them aggressive and it connects them. The Scorch Plague creates a sort of hive mind. Scorch become enthralled to the will of the Scorch Beast and ultimately the Scorch Beast Queen. They'll vocalize things using pronouns like we are one, never alone. That's the disease literally speaking through them, like the person is still in there somewhere and can't hit the brakes. Sometimes it even feels like they have a flicker of awareness too. Not enough to save themselves though, but enough that it makes it worse because now the fear is losing control while your body keeps moving. And that hive mind is why the plague wiped Appalachia out. Every faction that tried to fight it was fighting an enemy that replaced its losses instantly. You kill one Scorched, but the plague infects 3 more. You clear a town, but then a Scorch Beast passes over a road a mile away, and now an entire caravan is compromised. And because Scorch Beasts can summon Scorch like they're calling reinforcements, any fight can turn into a wave attack without warning. This is why if you see a big ass bat flying around, you should immediately look eye level lest you get fucked like I did when these things are near. The Scorch Beasts themselves are a whole separate terror. The Brotherhood calls them Sierra Bravo, which already tells you something, because when the Brotherhood gives something a code name, it's because they're trying to treat it like a military threat and not some animal. These things are massive. They've got wings, echolocation, and they're extremely agile for their size. They can hunt in daylight and they can cooperate in groups, and when they land, they're not helpless like your typical house bat since they've got claws and wing sweeps that can smash you up close. But most people don't even remember the claws first. We remember the sound, that heavy wing beat overhead. Every time I hear it overhead, it's this kind of oh shit moment because I know it's about to be one hell of a battle. And their attacks are ridiculous. They've got sonic blasts that can rattle structures. They can saturate an entire area with this radioactive mist that gets called crop dusting for a reason, because they can fly over and paint the whole area with poison air. So you end up with these really wild anti-Scorch Beast tactics that basically boil down to not staying outside and being in the open. And if you are, then don't be anywhere you can't get into a tiny building. And if you hear wings, pray you're not the most interesting thing in the area. But this is Fallout, so you're usually the most interesting thing on the map anyway. Now if we zoom out to look at the actual plague era, because Appalachia didn't fall overnight like the cities did when the bombs fell, Appalachia felt like a slow drowning where everyone kept thinking they had more time than they actually did. So at first, Scorch Beast sightings were dismissed as rumors or hallucinations. People thought Taggarty's Brotherhood was exaggerating. People thought it was just another excuse to demand ammo and supplies. And then they started showing up with guns, and the entire area got wiped. The Responders were one of the first groups to take it seriously, and that's why they're such a tragic faction. They were trying to do actual community building stuff like emergency services, aid, coordination. They formed the Fire Breathers, who are basically the kind of people to go into a burning house. They learned that ultrasight was a concern, and they worked with depleted ultrasight munitions. They even made specialized mods and weapons that could actually hit Scorch harder, and the most important part is that they were making progress on a vaccine. Dr. Claire Hudson was really close, but the region collapsed before they could finish and distribute it. So Appalachia didn't exactly lose because nobody tried, but it lost because they tried separately, with half-truths and mistrust and faction pride, while the plague was building momentum. The Free States had their own approach too. They were these decentralized paranoid survivalists, which usually makes people roll their eyes until the world proves the conspiracy is correct. Their setup in the mire gave them some breathing room early on, so they created systems to detect Scorch beasts, lure them, track them, and neutralize them. They actually had tech solutions to a problem that was moving too fast for most people to even understand. But even their tools weren't enough when the threat is airborne and the infection spreads like a wildfire you can't see. And then you have Taggarty's Brotherhood, which is another sad part to all of this. The Brotherhood has the best disciplined fighters and obviously some of the best tech. They identified the threat and consequently tried to treat it like a war. But this is war, just not in your run-of-the-mill war. It's a war where enemy turns civilians into combatants. It's a war where a Scorched beast can fly over your perimeter and create more enemies behind you. And on top of that, the Brotherhood's ideology gets in the way at the worst possible time. Nukes could collapse fissures and kill nests, but the Brotherhood doesn't want to be the faction that pushes the button again. They don't want to become what ended the world. Morally, it kinda makes sense, but strategically, it's a death sentence. So, by the time Vault 76 opens on October 23rd, 2102, Appalachia is this vast graveyard. The Responders are gone, the Free States are gone, Taggarty's Brotherhood is gone, and if you look around, raiders vanished or died off or fled. And the surface is empty of human settlements in the core region. So if you're a normal person, that would be one of the scariest parts. Yes, the enemies are strong, but it's the fact that the humans lost. Every group that should have been able to adapt here failed. The only humans left in the region are underground holdouts like Vault 76 or Vault 79's Secret Service presence. We see a few isolated cases that don't last, so that's why Vault 76 is the difference maker. They walked into the aftermath. Vault 76 opens and the dwellers follow the Overseer's trail. And what they're really doing is collecting the pieces of all the factions that died trying. They pick up the research the Responders started and they find out what ultrasight does. They learn what the plague is and how the hive mind works, and then they do the thing nobody else could do, which is they finish the inoculation work and inoculate themselves. That alone changes everything, because if you're immune, you can actually fight the Scorched without that constant one mistake and I'm next fear hanging over your head. You can be aggressive and clear zones. You can actually win battles without losing your whole force to infection. But the real turning point is the nuclear silos. Appalachia has these automated ICBM silos, and the only way to actually collapse the fissures and hit the nests is to use them. The other factions couldn't or wouldn't do it. The Responders and Free States didn't have the means, while the Brotherhood had the means but not the will. And then Vault 76 comes in with access to Enclave systems through Modus, and suddenly the path to launch becomes possible. This is where Vault 76 gets very blunt about nukes and the Vault Dwellers launch on key fissure sites, especially Fissure Site Prime, and they force a confrontation with the Scorch Beast Queen. If the Queen goes down, the hive loses its head. That doesn't magically erase the Scorch from the world, but it breaks the momentum. It turns the plague from unstoppable to at least containable. By 2103, the vaccine gets mass-produced and distributed to the groups returning to Appalachia, such as the likes of the settlers at Foundation and the raiders at Crater. Word of the inoculation spreads beyond Appalachia through caravans, and once that inoculation becomes normal, the plague stops creating new human cases in any meaningful way. So the Scorch Plague becomes something else at this point, more akin to remnants. It becomes cleanup and the nightmare that already happened, but left bodies behind. And those bodies are still out there in 2105. We find the Scorch victims didn't disappear when the vaccine arrived, since you still find them wandering. You still see them in that half-statue state, standing like burnt mannequins until something gets too close and they wake up. And then you have the petrified corpses, which are probably one of the creepier environmental details in the game, because they're scorched humans that, over time, can lock into that statue posture permanently and petrify from the inside out. They turn into these ash-like husks laced with ultrasight veins and crystals. We see that their weapons and clothing often don't survive the process, and it's like the plague is consuming everything that made them a person, even down to their gear. And the final salt in the wound is that even those petrified corpses can still irradiate you if you mess with them, so the land stays toxic even when the victim is dead. Appalachia literally keeps the scars. That's why the Scorched are feared in a different way than other creatures such as Deathclaws. Deathclaws are a predator in that they kill you and move on, but the Scorch Plague is more of a system, because it uses you. It turns you into the enemy. It locks you into a hive mind where you're never alone, which means you never get to be yourself again. And it forces communities to make impossible choices because you can't just fight back against a plague that recruits from your own population. So when people talk about fear in the Wasteland, Appalachia has a unique category that other regions don't. The fear of a monster in the woods is normal, in a Fallout-y kind of way. The fear of raiders on the road is normal. But the fear of looking at your friend and wondering if they're infected, or the fear of hearing wings overhead and knowing your walls don't matter, the fear of whole factions dying off one by one, even with advanced gear and tech, that's Appalachia's trauma. So yeah, going back to the earlier segment in this vid, Deathclaws are a nightmare that can sprint. But the Scorch Plague is a nightmare that can fly, infect, and turn your entire town into these messed up crispy zombies. And if you've ever walked through Appalachia and seen a line of petrified Scorch standing there like statues that are half buried in ash, ultrasight veins glowing through their bodies, you already know the reality that Appalachia survived a second apocalypse after the Great War.
Ghosts. Yes, you heard me right. People in the Wasteland are scared of ghosts, and they should be, because they are real in the Fallout world. Same with aliens and Lovecraftian horrors. It all exists, and people know about it. The supernatural side of Fallout is usually condensed down to just the Dunwich locations, but there's a lot going on in this series that would terrify the common Wastelander. That's not to say the Dunwich locations aren't also one of those, but I did want to seek out even more. When a Wastelander runs into some raiders or mutants, that's to be expected. But imagine one of them traveling inside the Dunwich building, which has happened a few times. What kind of fear would they have felt then? It would have been a different kind than running into those raiders, I can tell you that much. What about Wastelanders abducted by the Zaytans and experimented on? There's unlucky in the Wasteland. But running into one of these situations puts you in the upper echelon of falling on hard times. So let's just get it over with real quick. The Dunwich Borers and the building. Both of these locations are well known in their respective areas, and people tend to stay away from them, unless you're a bunch of raiders that have no idea what they're doing. Take any companion in Fallout 4 to the Borers, and you'll get a good idea as to what the people in the Commonwealth think about places like this. These are places in the Wasteland where you won't just get hurt or killed. You can, but before that, it might be even worse than death. You'll start hearing things like whispers in the dark, pulling you deeper inside. You'll see things that might not even be there in the first place. This isn't something a Wastelander can prepare for. It's why most people would choose not to go anywhere near these places if they could help it. Do you think the most badass merc would take a job involving the Dunwich building if they had heard all the rumors? Hell no. How can you fight something you can't even see in the first place? But that leads me to another question. How do people even hear about these places? Scavengers are everywhere in the waste, going building to building and looking for the next best scrap to get their hands on. Intact buildings or even mining quarries might look like a gold mine to these explorers, thinking that they either have some valuable scrap in storage, or maybe that they'd make a perfect shelter for the night. We know that people wander into these places post-war, just from Jamie's logs in the Dunwich building. Unfortunately for him, he couldn't just stay away, and those little whispers started becoming louder voices in his head, telling him to go further into the darkness. But I have to imagine he wasn't the first, and definitely won't be the last. So when a regular person does find their way into one of these places, they probably go in for a few minutes and instantly get their fill of the dread. I'm not sure if you guys have ever been in a similar situation, but I know I have. Just a place where I knew something felt off or wrong about it. Not even in a supernatural sense for the most part. Just a bad feeling. That's when you listen to that feeling and get the hell out. At least the smart people, and not like Jamie. But these Wastelanders probably got a brief glimpse into the supernatural and made it out. Then they run back to the nearest town and bar and start sharing their experience. This would turn into gossip and stories. And eventually with enough of them, people would learn to leave these places be, and might even start forming their own theories and stories around it. This is where the fear would come from. The quarry is no longer a place where raiders are hanging out. It's the place that messes with your head. People traveling the roads and warning each other to stay away and to not go too deep. And they fully believe this, as they should, really. These things do actually exist, and it happens to these people on a regular basis. I don't know if you'd call them haunted or not, but it's a little different than the ghost experience some Wastelanders might face. People are used to ghouls and robots, but ghosts are another story. Naturally, if you were one of those scavengers we talked about earlier, then you'd probably want to check out old houses and hotels. Maybe even old theme park attractions. Lots of goodies to be found in those places. That's how people end up in places like Grantchester Mystery Mansion. But going in here is going to result in some serious trauma. That is, if you make it out. The whole place is designed to make you think that it's haunted, with a bunch of funny little traps or even deadly ones. But as you explore it, it turns out that this place is actually haunted, with a ghost of a young girl. The mansion has this whole backstory about a family and some tragedies, and what comes of this young girl's spirit that's trapped in this location. This video isn't really about all of that, but it's a pretty terrifying discovery to be made, and you could see why some Wastelanders would be very hesitant to go into places like this. Just like with the Dunwich stories, ghost stories are also spread throughout the Wasteland, and people tend to get scared of them. But that little girl isn't the only ghost that we can run into in the series. In Fallout 2, you have Anna Winslow, who's a ghost that you can actually talk to, and she has a whole quest. She's not really scary, but I'm sure if some stranger was walking by and noticed the Chosen One having a casual conversation with a ghost, they might just take a second look and then be traumatized for the rest of their life. And then you have the cemeteries in Fallout New Vegas. The people in the Mojave know about these locations and that they're bad juju. Restless spirits that died for a cause that they probably didn't understand, or doing something that didn't sit right with them. All it takes to experience this fear is to just walk into these grave sites and listen. No wonder these places are always empty when you explore them. And it's pretty apparent why the Wasteland would be scared of ghosts and the supernatural. It's occurring in almost every single location. I didn't even mention the interloper and all that stuff going on in 76, mostly because we're going to talk about the Mothman and cryptids here in a bit. But that's just another place that is involved with the supernatural. And out of all these entities, we don't get a better look than of course with the Zedans, aliens. Nothing spreads good old panic than a classic alien tale of crop circles and abductions, or getting probed. Except in Fallout, this is unfortunately a common enough occurrence that people have started to take notice. Well, at least the smart ones. The Capital Wasteland might be the worst place to be a citizen if you're trying to avoid the third kind. People are constantly disappearing from the region and strange lights are seen in the sky. Whole patrols and caravans are vanishing on the roads, and people are starting to talk. Where could they possibly go? Honestly, it could be a number of things, from raiders to super mutants, but the worst culprits are the aliens, and they're taken aboard the mothership Zeta. People describe being frozen in place and unable to move no matter what they do, and then they're lifted into the sky by a beam of light. Then they get experimented on and thrown into a cell. I don't know if these people are the lucky ones because sometimes they end up back in the Wasteland with no idea of how they got there. Other times though, we don't know what happens to these people. The Zedans don't discriminate either. They'll take whoever they can get their hands on. That includes children, like we see in the Zeta DLC. At least unlike with the ghosts or the Lovecraft stuff, with aliens you can fight back. This is a physical force. You probably won't win the fight because of their advanced technology, but it's better than losing your mind and having no choice on that. From a Wastelander's point of view, this is the worst possible scenario. Being abducted and probed is a bad day for anyone. And when people start to notice things and start talking about it, it's probably diminished as folklore or just being plain crazy. But the more and more people start to share their experiences, the more people become afraid. Did old Billy Bob really see a UFO crash land in the swamp? Did Reggie Ray see some strange looking fellers on top of the hill around a fire pit? The fear spreads and more people begin to take notice. I'm curious if they'll fully ever grasp this threat. I feel bad for them, honestly. How many more monsters can these people genuinely face? This might be a low one on their lists, all things considered. Usually the supernatural stuff is saved for bedtime or campfire stories, and it's for fun. But for people like Jamie and the logs of people being abducted on Mothership Zeta, I can guarantee that supernatural fear becomes the forefront of their thoughts. Those who wandered into these abandoned buildings and got a little taste of the power of eldritch beings would never be able to get that experience out of their heads. A true fear that you can't touch and define. Like I said in the Paranoia section, and what keeps coming back throughout this video is that fear is the unexplainable. And even for us on the outside, we still don't know how all of these supernatural elements work in this world. So even for us, it can get a little bit scary. Ghosts and eldritch beings are bad, but you're unlikely to run into those. What people should really be afraid of are the living and walking mythical creatures. Monsters so powerful that running into them is most likely a death sentence. The Mothman isn't just a story told in pre-war times to scare kids. It has now become a reality. Because in Appalachia, people aren't just scared of raiders or radiation. They're scared of the idea that the woods have something else in them. Something watching from the tree line, and something you can't explain. Why should they be more scared of cryptids than regular creatures in the wastes though? I think it comes down to the fact that cryptids feel different. A Yao Guai is hunting for meat, and other creatures just act like animals for the most part. Cryptids behave in ways that are impossible to predict. At least a few of them do. Why does the Mothman appear and disappear in random locations? And what does it all mean? So let's start with that. The Mothman is not feared because of the physical creature that shows up. It can be scary and you'll probably die. But what's even worse is what the Mothman represents in these wastes. It's something like an omen for people. An entire cult formed around this being, and whenever someone comes across a sign or a statue for this creature, they're terrified that it means something bad is on the horizon. Whether you're torn apart by the insane cultists or the actual creature stalking you in the darkness. The cult sees these appearances and visions as warnings. The Mothman has become an idol of impending doom. The cult's own history kind of shows us that. There's an account of a ritual where a preacher claims one of their members, Charles, saw the Mothman and heard warnings of impending disaster. And that warning is what pushed the group into their insane behavior right on the eve of the Great War. Even if a regular Wastelander doesn't know every detail of that particular story, it still affects them to this day. People built an entire belief system around the Mothman, and these people have created a widespread image of this being. If you were a regular dude in Appalachia for the first time and you ran across a bunch of freaky cult totems and signs, you'd start to get freaked out too. Then you notice some strange creatures staring at you from the tree line that looks a little too close to those paintings. That is true fear. That's how the omens are born. People don't know what it wants, so they assume the worst. And every piece of bad luck afterwards gets blamed on that sighting. Once the Mothman fear has been established, it becomes the doorway to cryptids as a whole. Because in Appalachia, there's a hell of a lot more cryptids to be found. None of them quite like the Mothman. That thing is something special. But all of them are far different than regular wasteland creatures you run into. Okay, maybe not behemoths or deathclaws, but I'm sure you get my point. The first reason that they become so feared is that Appalachia as an environment creates stories where people say, I think I saw something. And then they become, people go missing out there. It's really difficult for wastelanders in these parts. The radiation is new and mutations are exploding in the region instead of stabilizing. These people are running into new monsters every other day. The worst of them get their own stories and myths, which makes them even more terrifying from a story listener's perspective. They hear about the Blue Devil and picture the most heinous werewolf-looking abomination, which isn't exactly wrong, but imaginations can run wild. Another one is the Flatwoods Monster, because it sits right on the border between cryptid and alien, and the way people describe it is pure fear. Now the Flatwoods is definitely just Zayden's, so they probably should have ended up in the alien section we talked about earlier. But what makes them so feared is that people have no idea what they are. Even if you got a good look and survived an encounter, you still might be confused by the whole ordeal. So people will start spinning some more tales about them, creating a larger than life image of these creatures. And I'm sure you're starting to see a pattern with these cryptids. And even if someone thinks that sounds exaggerated, the storyteller in 76 also says how someone gets dragged away. The witness only gets a glimpse and then they're gone. Witnesses of the attacks are left dumbfounded, and they'll spread that fear far and wide. So when Wastelanders fear cryptids, a lot of it isn't just the fear of death. It's a fear that the woods are full of things that people don't understand, never really will, and that you might stumble into them by accident just because you took the wrong road at the wrong time. But it's not just cryptids that get these type of stories. There are legendary creatures in the waste that gain crazy reputations for just how dangerous they are. These things are living proof that the wasteland is still continuing to mutate and get worse, even in the later years. These things are usually creatures people in the wastes are used to, but taken to ridiculous extremes. Like the legendary Deathclaw, which we already explained why Deathclaws are terrifying, but now you have the final boss version. Anyone getting a glimpse of one of these bad boys is gonna run back to wherever they came from and start telling tales of the biggest Deathclaw they ever seen, or the biggest bloatfly. Most people will just hear a fish story, of course, but they'd be wrong. Legendary creatures are out there and they should be feared. Settlers trade stories about caravans that vanished overnight, or entire buildings cleared out by a single creature that just wouldn't stay down. A legendary Deathclaw or behemoth is going to make some big waves in an area. When one moves into a place, trade routes probably shut down, and towns will either prepare or abandon the region entirely. The fact that these creatures usually survive multiple attacks means that you don't figure out a legendary creature. You're either going to escape or you don't. But yes, Big Lizard is very scary. Big Giant Green Guy is also very scary. But it's more than that. People travel the wastes every single day, and they usually come prepared and know what they're going to run into. But it's creatures like cryptids and legendaries that keep them guessing. They'll always have this little thought in the back of their mind. What if I did run into one of them? What would I do? Do you continue to protect the caravan or just run? The creatures that are unexpected is what keeps mercs and wanderers terrified of these wastes. Again, it's the fear of the unknown.
The thing that has probably killed more people in Fallout than any creature ever could is the one thing you can't see and you can't hear until it's already inside you. Radiation is the Wasteland's real boogeyman because it doesn't need anything other than for you to be standing in the wrong place for a little too long. And what makes radiation scarier than almost anything else is that it's not the same enemy you can negotiate with or outrun. Not that you can outrun things like Deathclaws, but you get my drift. You can't talk your way out of it like you can with negotiating with someone in the Mojave. It's microscopic and invisible. It's the definition of the phrase silent killer, which is why some people in Fallout call it the Phantom Death. It's this unique kind of threat that makes even hardened Wastelanders act superstitious, because you can't trust your instincts around it. Your instincts would tell you the water looks clean. Not that we necessarily have a choice, because sometimes dirty water is all we got. Then your Geiger counter starts screaming and you realize your instincts were ass. Radiation in Fallout is ionizing radiation, which just means it has enough energy to knock electrons off atoms and mess up the chemistry of your body. It can come as particles, or atoms moving stupid fast, or waves like gamma rays, but either way, the end result is the same for a human. Your cells get damaged, thus your tissue breaks down, and if you take enough of it, your body starts failing in ways that look like you're rotting while you're still alive. Like this guy. That's why radiation has always been a different kind of horror, or at least fear in Fallout. Most things can kill you quickly out here, unless you're locked in a radar cage. But with radiation, you die slowly, and for most people who don't have the means of resources, that's usually the outcome. The reason Fallout's world even looks like Fallout is because pre-war society practically worshipped nuclear energy. In the Fallout timeline, radioactive power became the backbone of industry and daily life. Everything from badass cars to elegant robots or weapons or batteries and generators. I mean, even medical tech. Consumer products that never should have had anything radioactive near them tended to have crazy shit in them. And it was all justified the same way it always has been when a society gets addicted to convenience. The benefits are worth the risk. Kind of like we see with today's food. If you know, you know. You can almost hear the old commercials in your head promising that the future is atomic. Meanwhile, the future is quietly piling up waste and leaking it into the ground. And that's the thing, even before the bombs fell, radiation was already poisoning the world. It may not have solely been through reactors and warheads, but we saw it through corporate negligence. Fallout loves showing you this through environmental storytelling, like with companies cutting corners and regulations getting loosened. So by the time the Great War happens on October 23rd, 2077, the world is hit with the bill coming due for decades of radioactive shortcuts. Then the bombs fall, and radiation stops being this background hazard of the past and becomes the landscape itself. Nuclear fallout is the delayed effect that never really ends. When a bomb detonates, you get all these fission products like isotopes that decay at different rates, and the fallout mixing into a radioactive soup that can hang around from days to centuries depending on where it lands and what it binds to. Fallout likes to play with this idea a lot because it explains why some areas recover and others become permanent hell zones. Speaking of, radiation in 76 is a bitch, isn't it? Some places get lucky though with less direct hits. Fallout settles and decays enough that by the time you're in the 2100s or 2200s, people can actually live there without melting. But other places get hit in ways that basically doom them. If a warhead hits close to the ground, kicks up dirt and debris, then the soil itself becomes radioactive. Or if a reactor melts down, or perhaps a facility gets breached and starts leaking. Or even if a company had been dumping waste for years and nobody cared until the world got shreked. Those are the places that become myths, the places that get names like they're cursed. The Glow is the perfect example. If you've played Fallout or the original Fallout, you know exactly what I mean. The Glow is a location that teaches you the real rule of the Wasteland. Some places are not meant to be entered by humans because the air itself is lethal. People who tried to explore it without proper protection didn't get heroic deaths of the Wasteland's tail, but got slow whispering ones. And that's why the Geiger counter is perhaps one of the most important characters in Fallout because it's your sixth sense. Since radiation can't be detected by your body, in Fallout, technology becomes your intuition. The old school Geiger counters like the C-Rads models and the ones built into Pip-Boys are the reason Vault Dwellers survive situations that would wipe out most Wastelanders. A Vault Dweller hears the clicks and knows to back up. A random scavenger sees a clean looking puddle and thinks they're lucky. The Wasteland is full of people who died because something looked safe. Pre-war society knew radiation was dangerous though, so they invented countermeasures. We see things like Rad-X, Radaway, specialized suits, decontamination gear. They even built entire vault systems and Pip-Boys with radiation detection. The problem is that they thought they could manage this invisible bastard forever. They thought they could bottle the sun, power the world, and never pay for it. Then the world ended in 2 hours and all those managed risks turned into a continent-wide hazard. Radiation also changed the tone of Fallout because it's the reason so many creatures exist in the first place. Now, in real life, radiation doesn't usually give you a giant scorpion. In Fallout, it does, because Fallout isn't trying to always play by the rules of physics and biology. Which is cool because then we get other things like cryptids, which is a discussion for another time. I'm not saying that they're made by radiation, I'm just saying that they're kind of like fairy tales and it's fun to explore. So Fallout is trying to create a world where radiation is like a twisted force of nature in that it makes relatively nice species like Brahmin or vicious ones like rad scorpions. It's like the Wasteland has its own evolution engine, and radiation is simply the fuel. But the most terrifying mutation radiation can cause is what it can do to people. Because most of the time, radiation just kills you via nausea, bleeding, fatigue, vomiting, hair loss, teeth falling out, your body failing from the inside. I know I'm starting to sound like a pharma ad, but it's true. Fallout lore talks about radiation poisoning with things like blood pooling in the gums or hemorrhaging, and things like having your skin breaking down. It's the kind of death that makes people in the Wasteland fear water almost as much as weapons, because the difference between clean and contaminated isn't visible. But sometimes radiation doesn't kill you fast. Sometimes it changes you. And that's where ghouls come in. Ghoulification is one of the most iconic horror concepts from Fallout because it turns radiation into this existential fear. Would you rather die or become something else entirely that society shies away from? It's not the worst way to live since ghouls can live for absurd lengths of time and can regenerate. They're immune to radiation in a way normal humans aren't, so it sounds kind of like a superpower. But in reality, it's a curse wrapped in a perk, because you don't just become a ghoul and keep living normally. Your appearance changes into something people fear, and you actually become infertile. In many areas, you become the target of prejudice. And the worst part is the question hanging over every ghoul's head. Will I go feral? That fear is huge in Fallout because feral ghouls are basically what happens when the brain degrades past the point of rationality. You lose memory and the human part to you, and what's left is hunger and rage. And long-term radiation can push ghouls further into extremes like glowing ones, where you become a walking radiation source. So radiation can make you live long enough to watch yourself become something you don't even recognize. And then you get the ideological side of radiation, which is one of my favorite Fallout nuances because it shows us how humans cope with horror. Some people call it the Phantom Death, but other people worship it. The children of Adam see radiation as Adam's glow, which is basically a holy force that prophesies the world was meant to be remade. I wouldn't expect any less though, since when reality becomes too awful to process, people either fear it like a demon or turn it into a god. Same phenomenon, but different coping mechanism. That worship also ties back into pre-war propaganda. Fallout's world loves selling nuclear power as a miracle, so it makes sense that after the war, some people keep that energy and twist it into a religion. It's like the old world's obsession evolved into something more desperate because people are practically begging for some type of hope to exist. Radiation also becomes this weird form of geography in Fallout because in other games, geography is the basic mountains and rivers like in GTA or Red Dead Redemption. In Fallout, geography is also littered with invisible zones of death. I think the glowing sea in Fallout 4 is actually the best modern example because it's a region where normal rules don't apply. Storms are radioactive and both the air is poison and the ground is poison, so you don't go there unless you have one hell of a reason. And speaking of storms, rad storms make radiation feel alive because the sky turns green and suddenly your body is taking rads like the weather itself is trying to kill you. Which it is. In Fallout, you can't just build a shack and pretend you're safe. You can be sitting in your settlement and then the sky decides you're about to get irradiated for the next 10 minutes. The best quote-unquote strategy is literally to go inside and wait, which is kind of funny and depressing because it's a metaphor for Fallout in general. So when you ask why radiation is feared, it's because it sits behind everything. If you don't have the right meds, the right suit, or the right warning from your Geiger counter, you can just die from existing in the wrong spot. It's this old world fingerprint that never really washes off. 200 years later, the bombs are old news, but radiation is still here in every single thing. You can make a case that Deathclaws or Scorch beasts are the scariest thing you can see in the Wasteland, but radiation is the scariest thing that you can't see. It's the reason the Wasteland is the Wasteland. It's the invisible enemy that never stopped doing what it does, which is turning the world into a place where survival always has a price. There's plenty of things to be afraid of throughout the Fallout universe, whether it's something physical like creatures that shouldn't exist to things that can't always be directly seen like radiation or paranoia. For me, I actually think the Scorch Plague might be one of the worst things to happen throughout the timeline of events that we know of Fallout lore. But what do you guys think? What's the scariest thing you could think of if you were a Wastelander? Is there something we missed? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, guys, and remember, enjoyed time is never wasted time, and we'll see you in the next.